So this is exciting. We're actually in the real house of James Stewart, his birthplace, which is now a bothy that you can stay the night in. And this is now chapter 19, so we're racing along now. It's still nominally the 6th of July, so a lot happens on this day. At last, about 10:30 o'clock, we came to the top of a brae and saw lights below us. It seemed a house door stood open and let out a beam of fire and candlelight, and all round the house, and steading, 5 or 6 persons were moving hurriedly about, each carrying a lighted brand. "James must have tint his wits," said Alan. "If this was the soldiers instead of you and me, he would be in a bonny mess. But I dare say he'll have a sentry on the road, and he would ken well enough no soldiers would find the way that we came." Well, we came just up the path, actually. We cheated a bit. You should come across the hills. I think it's possible, but I didn't do it. Hereupon he whistled 3 times in a particular manner. It was strange to see how, at the first sound of it, all the moving torches came to a stand, as if the bearers were affrighted, and how, at the third, the bustle began again as before. Having thus set folks' mind at rest, we came down the brae and were met at the yard gate, for this place was like a well-doing farm. Well, not really. By a tall, handsome man of more than 50, who cried out to Alan in the Gaelic. "James Stewart," said Alan, "I will ask you to speak in Scotch, for here is a young gentleman with me that has none of the other." Scotch is kind of English, I think. "This is him," he added, putting his arm through mine, "a young gentleman of the lowlands, and a laird in his country too, but I am thinking it would be better for his health if we give his name the go-by." James of the Glens turned to me for a moment and greeted me courteously enough. The next he had turned to Alan. "This has been a dreadful accident," he cried. "It will bring trouble on the country," and he wrung his hands. "Hoots," said Alan, "you must take the sour with the sweet. Colin Roy is dead, and be thankful for that." "Aye," said James, "but by my troth I wish he was alive again. It's all very fine to blow and boast beforehand, but now it's done, Alan, and who's to bear the weight of it? The accident fell out in Appin, mind ye that, Alan? It's Appin that must pay, and I am a man that has a family." Well, while this was going on, I looked about me at the servants. Some were on ladders, digging in the thatch of the house or the farm buildings, from which they brought out guns, swords, and different weapons of war. Others carried them away, and by the sound of mattock blows from somewhere further down the brae, I suppose they buried them. Though they were all so busy, there prevailed no kind of order in their efforts. Men struggled together for the same gun, and ran into each other with their burning torches, and James was continually turning about from his talk with Alan to cry out orders which were apparently never understood. The faces in the torchlight were like those of people overborne with hurry and panic, and though none spoke above his breath, their speech sounded both anxious and angry. James carried me into the kitchen and sat down with me at table, smiling and talking at first in a very hospitable manner, but presently the gloom returned upon him. He sat frowning and biting his fingers, only remembered me from time to time, and then gave me but a word or two and a poor smile, and back into his private terrors. His wife sat by the fire and wept with her face in her hands. His eldest son was crouched upon the floor, running over a great mass of papers and now and again setting one alight and burning it to the bitter end. At last James could keep his seat no longer, and begged my permission to be so unmannerly as walk about. "I am but poor company altogether, sir," says he, "but I can think of nothing but this dreadful accident and the trouble it is like to bring upon quite innocent persons." A little after he observed his son burning a paper which he thought should have been kept, and at this his excitement burst out so that it was painful to witness. He struck the lad repeatedly. "Are you gone gait?" he cried. "Do you wish to hang your father?" And forgetful my presence, carried on at him a long time together in the Gaelic, the young man answering nothing, only the wife, at the name of hanging, throwing her apron over her face and sobbing out louder than before. This was all wretched for a stranger like myself to hear and see, and I was right glad when Alan returned, looking like himself, in his fine French clothes, though to be sure they were now grown almost too battered and withered to deserve the name of fine. It seemed understood that I was to fly with him, and they were all busy upon our equipment. They gave us each a sword and pistols, though I professed my inability to use the former, and with these and some ammunition, a bag of oatmeal, an iron pan, and a bottle of right French brandy, we were ready for the heather. "See here," said James, returning to his former manner. "For with all that I have said and that you have said, Alan, it will look very black against the two of us. Do you mark that? Well, follow me out and you'll see that I'll have to get a paper out against you myself. I'll have to offer a reward for you. Aye, will I? It's a sore thing to do between such near friends, but if I get the dirdom of this dreadful accident, I'll have to fend for myself, man. Do you see that? He spoke with pleading earnestness, taking Alan by the breast of the coat. Aye, Alan, I see that. Oh, sorry. Aye, said Alan, I see that. And you'll have to be clear of the country, Alan. Aye, and clear of Scotland. You and your friend from the Lowlands too, for I'll have to paper your friend from the Lowlands. You see that, Alan? Say that you see that. I thought Alan flushed a bit. This is uncommon hard on me that brought him here, James, said he, throwing his head back. It's like making me a traitor. Now, Alan, man, cried James, look things in the face. He'll be papered anyway. Mungo Campbell will be sure to paper him. What matters if I paper him too? And then, Alan, I am a man that has a family. And then after a little pause on both sides, and Alan, it'll be a jury of Campbells, said he. Now this paper business is about putting up wanted posters. So James is going to put up wanted posters for Alan and for David, so that it looks like that he's on the side of the Campbells in trying to track down these criminals. There's one thing, said Alan musingly, that nobody kens his name. Nor yet shall they, Alan, that's David's name. Nor yet shall they, Alan, that's my hand on it, cried James, for all the world as if he had really known my name and was foregoing some advantage. But just the habit he was in and what he looked like and his age and the like, I couldn't well do less. I have but one word to say, said I, for to all this dispute I am a perfect stranger. But the plain common sense is to set the blame where it belongs, and that is on the man that fired the shot. Paper him, as ye call it, set the hunt on him, and let honest innocent folks show their faces in safety. Well, that's a bit naive, isn't it? But at this, both Alan and James cried out in horror, bidding me hold my tongue, for that was not to be thought of, and asking me what the Camerons would think, which confirmed me it must have been a Cameron that did the act, and if I did not see that the lad might be caught. You haven't surely thought of that, said they, with such innocent earnestness that my hands dropped at my side and I despaired of argument. Very well then, said I, paper me if you please, paper Alan, paper King George. We're all three innocent, and that seems to be what's wanted. But at least, sir, said I to James, recovering from my little fit of annoyance, I am Alan's friend, and if I can be helpful to friends of his, I will not stumble at the risk. I thought it best to put a fair face on my consent, for I saw Alan was troubled. And besides, thinks I to myself, as soon as my back is turned, they'll paper me, as they call it, whether I consent or not. Hoot, hoot, said Alan, looking mighty silly. The day comes on consoon in this month of July, and tomorrow there'll be a fine to-do in Appin, a fine riding of dragoons, and crying of Crachan, and running of redcoats, and it behoves you and me to be the sooner gone. So thereupon we said farewell, and set out again, bending somewhat eastward, and over much the same broken country as before. So there is our one look at James Stewart, who was hanged for this murder, for real, even though he didn't do it. So here's another bit of actual history butting into the story, and living history, because this is where he lived.